Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to Data Demo Day. Over the next 3 hours, we'll be taking an inside look at 3 of the top data technologies available today. And we have assembled a very strong lineup. 3 solutions, each offering a compelling value proposition across data virtualization, data catalogs, and data integration. First up is Denodo. And they're a great solution to lead us off because Denodo delivers real-time insights and data services with modern data virtualization. What that means is that they can help you to better leverage your data assets by providing agile self-service access to governed data, creating a data warehouse combining new and existing databases, and delivering real-time data to all of your analytics tools. And we're joined by Ed Robbins, Senior Sales Engineer at Denodo. Ed, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can. So
okay,
that's a
great.
good start.
That is a good start, yes. Always a good start.
Well, and I know you have been in the data sector for quite a while, previously with Oracle. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up getting involved with Denodo.
Well, I mean, as you said, I spent about 20 years at Oracle prior to coming to Denodo, mainly focused on data management, data warehousing, BI. And for 20 years, I saw the focus on trying to get customers to consolidate data into less databases or into one large database. And frankly, it was 20 years of frustration. So seeing a sort of new cutting edge type solution that really approached it in a more elegant way as opposed to a brute force method of integration was kind of exciting for me. And so it's been 4 years, and it's probably been the best 4 years of my working life.
Outstanding. Well, I know you're going to get into the insides of the Denodo solution, the platform. And so we'll let you do that. Before you do, though, I'm sure you're going to give us a bit of an overview.
Yes.
So what I'll do is I'll get out of the way, let you go through your presentation and demo, and then we'll come back in about a half an hour when we'll have some questions for you that we'll take from the audience.
Okay, sounds great.
Talk to you in a bit.
Okay, so my name is Edwin Robbins. I'm a senior sales engineer with Denodo. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of Denodo version 8. That is our latest release of the Denodo platform. We released that in August, and we have an update coming shortly in January. And so once I give you a brief overview of the product, I'm going to just, before I get into the demo, I'm going to address execution and performance up front, because, in a typical presentation, it's always the first thing that people want to talk about when it comes to data virtualization is how we would achieve performance. And I think it's a pretty unique differentiator, so I just want to make sure I address that up front. I'll then jump into a couple quick demos to just show you where the product provides value, and then we can do some Q&A. So this slide represents the general logical architecture for Denodo. Okay, so the basic functionality of Denodo is represented here in this red box, and the way we operate is, as you see down here, we have lots of different data sources that we're representing, and one of the key paradigms of Denodo is that we want to be able to connect to any data source where it resides. So whether we're talking about data coming from a web service or coming from a cloud application or a traditional database, one of the key tenets of Denodo is to minimize data movement. So we will connect to the data in place, and then our server really has 2 functions. So we have a metadata repository, which holds all of the metadata for our various sources. And so once we've imported that metadata, the developers have a modeling process that's going to be very similar to creating a semantic model in an enterprise BI tool or creating an enterprise data model. The key differentiator is that with Denodo, those data assets don't have to be in one place. And also, as opposed to a data catalog or like a data dictionary, we also give you the ability to execute things directly from our metadata repository. So another key tenet of Denodo, in addition to being able to connect to any data source, is to make any data source available to any consuming application. So the bulk of our customers today are using Denodo for analytic queries. So I would say 80 to 85% of the query of the access today are SQL queries coming through JDBC and ODBC. But we see quite a bit of traction around customers using Denodo to create data as a service. So Denodo manages REST APIs and GraphQL components quite well as OData. And so we have customers that are using it to create enterprise data assets that serve as a single source of truth across both internal and external consumers. So you can create a REST API, say, for a customer that is pulling data from 5 different data sources, but is ultimately presenting your golden customer record to your end users. Okay, and then we also have a web data catalog and search tool. I want to make sure we don't confuse this with the enterprise data catalog type tools that you'll be seeing later. The Denodo data catalog is really focused on being a single place for the end users to come and find assets that Denodo has created. So the target here is not for the developers that are creating new things in Denodo. It's more targeted at the BI end users that want to create new reports based on things that are created in Denodo. And I'll show you an example of that in the demo. So the development architecture for Denodo is represented here. And similar to the prior slide, you can see the bottom layer is basically all of the sources. The middle layer is where we do our modeling, and the top layer is where people are coming to access the new assets. Okay, so the development is a little bit different with Denodo than like traditional ETL and other integration, because once we make connections to these physical sources, we're not moving any data. We're just bringing the metadata into that middle layer, and from that metadata, our developers create new Denodo views that can be accessed by any end user using any interface of choice. So the key capabilities for Denodo are really represented here. And I would say that, on the left side, we're going to see 2 demos today covering an example of source abstraction and also an example of semantic data modeling. But the general concept here with source abstraction is creating a single virtual repository for your end users to access any of your data. So rather than them, needing to know where certain data sets are, or how to access, or even more troublesome, how to join different types of data sets together, that's all handled by Denodo behind the scenes. The other benefit of this is when oftentimes IT will want to move a physical data set to a different technology, and they're often hamstrung because of all the things that are tied to that data source. So customers that have an on-prem data warehouse that they want to move to the cloud are oftentimes coming to Denodo because we can help with that transition. So you put Denodo between your BI tools and your data sources, and the BI tool only talks to Denodo, and that way you can move the data sources around at will behind the scenes. The semantic data model, we'll see an example of in a little bit, but the basic idea is, lots of customers, especially ones that have grown through acquisition, have acquired lots of DSS assets over time. And they're often faced with the challenge of, how do we integrate these new assets into our existing data stores? And often by the time they get done doing that integration, there's another asset that needs to be integrated. So the target with Denodo is basically to create a logical semantic model over the top of these assets so that to your end users, it looks like they're connecting to one single repository, but that data is all staying where it originally resides. So it's a much, much faster time to market for delivering these consolidated data models to your end users. I already touched on the publication options, so I'll skip over that. The dynamic query optimizer, this is really one of the core features of why people buy Denodo in the first place, and I'll touch on this in a bit. But the basic concept here is that Denodo has a query optimizer that's very similar to a relational databases optimizer. The main difference is that our optimizer is targeted at minimizing the amount of data that moves across the network. So we're always trying to minimize the amount of data that we have to move, and that's the function of the optimizer. And then lastly, in development and operations, we've got integration with single sign-on, as you would expect. We have a centralized solution manager. But one thing I do want to point out that we came out with in version 8 is this automatic cloud deployments. So in version 8, we released the first version to work with Amazon's EC2 instances. And basically the idea here is instead of having to install your own host and install software on those hosts and do all the configurations with your load balancer and so on and so forth, you basically put your Amazon credentials into the Denodo Solution Manager. You answer some questions in 4 wizard screens about the size and shape of the deployment that you want to deploy. Do you want to do things like bursting, or do you want it to just be static? And basically, Denodo takes that information, talks to the AWS APIs, and automatically deploys your environment. So what used to take several days or weeks of work is now done in a matter of minutes. So how does execution work? So the basic idea is that we only store metadata, and we're always trying to minimize the network traffic, as I mentioned. So the information that we have to work with, the most important thing is going to be the incoming SQL statement. That's going to tell us, is it asking for a detail level report, or is it asking for an aggregation or a calculation? We also are very interested in the type of metadata that is on the table. So the source system, the primary keys, the foreign keys, that's all going to give us all information that we can use to come up with the best optimization plan. And just like a relational database, we're also going to look at data statistics to understand the volumes of the data that we're accessing, and that's going to be a tremendous driver in how we go about executing these queries. So these are just some of the strategies that we employ. I'm not going to go through these for the sake of time, but the basic idea is that over time we keep adding more and more capabilities to accelerate these queries. So in the most recent release, we added the summary query capability. This is very similar to query acceleration that you see in BI tools or materialized view type acceleration. In the last release, we introduced MPP integration. Going forward, we're going to integrate. We're going to offer an integrated Presto cluster if customers want it. So we keep adding more and more features to try and optimize these queries and to make it as transparent as possible for the end users. So let me give you a quick example, and then I'll get into the demo. So what is the when I keep talking about the optimizers trying to perform the most performant queries and whatnot. So what does that really mean? So here's a classic data virtualization query that a lot of times is the point where people get frustrated with federated tools or other DV type tools. So here we're just asking for the average sale by state. Okay, so by definition, this is a fairly simple business question since it's only going to return 50 rows of data. So to the end users, this looks like a very simple question. The challenge from an IT standpoint is that our customer and our sales data are in different databases. So we need to figure out the best execution plan for this particular query. Now, over here, option 1, this represents what we call the naive strategy. And frankly, this is how most federated tools would execute this particular query. They're going to access the customer database and read all that data back, and they're going to access the sales database, read all that data back, do a join, and then do an aggregation. The challenge with this is right here. We need to move 300 million rows of data over the network before we can even start returning data to the end user. And so that's a big bottleneck in this particular query. So rather than doing this, what Denodo would do is either option 2 or option 3. Option 2 is taking advantage of something called temporary data movement. So what Denodo does here is we would first read the 2 million rows from the customer table and make a copy of that over in the sales database. At that point, then, we would just have the sales database execute the join and the aggregation in place and return the 50 rows to the end user. The other option is Denodo could execute something called partial aggregation pushdown. So what this means is that we know that the customer ID is the primary key on the customer table. And since that's the key that we're using to join to the sales database, we know that we can pre-aggregate the sales database by ID. So even though the query is asking for the data to be returned by state, Denodo knows that this is the lowest level in the table, and so it's going to pre-aggregate by customer ID, and we're going to reduce those 300 million rows down to 2 million rows, return the 2 million rows to Denodo, join it with the customer table, and then ultimately return our result to the end user. Okay, and the reason, where this comes into play, just a simple, and this is something you could easily try on your own. Here you see the performance difference, right? So just by applying a simple change to how Denodo sends the SQL down to these source systems, we reduced the amount of data that had to be transferred from 302 million rows to 4 million rows. And comparing this to a setup where we had a BI tool talking to Denodo, which was connected to the data sources, versus a BI tool that was just connected to the data sources, you can see the improvement. So it's about a 13 or 14x improvement just by Denodo changing the SQL statement that it sends down to the sales database. Okay? So I'm going to jump over to the demo right now. Excuse me. And there we go. Okay, so in version 8, Denodo integrated all of our front-end tools with single sign-on server. So I have a single sign-on server set up here, and these are all of the tools that I have available to me. So I have 2 different environments set up here. My first environment is a development environment. So I have all the tools that the developers would need. And then we also have an end user environment. So if you have end users that are just going to be consuming Denodo views, you would just provision them to this environment, and they can just access their views from the catalog, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. So first I'm going to open up the Design Studio, and I'm going to build a simple view based on a request from one of our customers. So let me go back to that. So this is the request that we got from an end user. What was the impact of the marketing campaign for each country? So the challenge from an IT standpoint is that this data is in multiple source systems. So we've got our historical sales data is in a Presto database, and it's about 3 million rows. Our campaign information is in a cloud-based application, and that's a fairly small data set, but we don't have database level access to it. So we're going to basically just get a JSON document that we need to transform. And then lastly, we need to combine it with our customer master, which is in an Oracle database. So the way Denodo approaches this is we make a physical connection to each of these sources and extract the metadata for the object that we want to work with, which is represented here in these grayed out boxes called a base view. Once we've imported this metadata, now it's just up to the developer to do a graphical drag and drop operation to join some columns together, create a new calculation, and then ultimately create a view that end users can access directly. Okay, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So let's go in here. So this is the Denodo Design Studio, and the way we organize things is in what we call virtual databases. So each of these over here represents a virtual database or a VDB. And inside a virtual database, I have things organized by folder. So I typically put all of my connectivity information into one folder. So that's going to be my data source definitions and my base views. So my base views are basically the tables and the objects from those source systems that I want to work with in my development environment. Okay. Now, once I've imported the base views, down here in the integration layer, what I did is I cleaned up those base views. I changed some of the naming mechanisms. I did a little data cleansing. And what I've done is I've created some views to represent our dimension objects and our fact tables. Okay. So if I want to build the view that we talked about a little bit earlier, I'm going to start with the store sales history. And I want to build a new join. So there's my fact table. And I just need to grab the campaign management, the customer, and the date dimension to complete my view. Okay. Now, so the developer's task is really going to be similar to this. They're going to basically drag and drop between some views. They are going to then define the columns that make up that join. So in this case, it's promo to promo. And then customer to customer. And then dates to sold date. Okay. So those are my 3 joins. If I click on the join conditions, I can see the actual definitions of them. And if I wanted to change this to any kind of outer join, I could do that as well. Now, this particular query is an aggregation. So the first thing I need to do is define my group by clause. So that is going to be, let's see, I'm just going to type it in here, promo. Okay, so we got month, year, country, and promotion name. Okay, so in my output, I'm going to basically now just define evolution, campaign management, evolution. That's going to be the name of my view. I can then change the names of any of the columns that I want. So I'm going to change birth country to country. And then the last thing I need to do is I just need to add the calculated field. So I need to sum the total sales by campaign. So I'm going to create a calculated field to aggregate the sales by campaign. Okay, I got my formatting correct and I'm good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Oh, sorry, I ran this demo before and didn't delete it. Oh gosh, I just ran this demo before and didn't delete it. There we go. Okay, so there's the demo or the view that we just created, campaign evolution. All right, so if I go over and look at campaign evolution, what I always typically do before I actually run a query is I like to look at the execution plan. So, query plan. Okay, so if I take a look at a query plan, if I click on the top level, this is going to show me the high-level summary of how Denodo plans on running this particular query. So the first thing I look for are what are the optimizations that it plans to apply, and I can see it's going to apply join reordering and data movement, which is what I've expected. And so if I click on any of these boxes, it'll show me exactly what's going on. So typically, I read these from the lowest left-hand corner. So this is showing me that the first thing it's going to do is connect to my Oracle database, and it's going to query my customer information. And then this icon is basically telling me once it queries all that customer information, what we're going to do is then implement a data movement plan. So we're going to copy that customer data over to where my fact table is and just run the query all over there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. And as I said before, this is running against like a 3 million row table against a 100,000 row table. So it should take a minute or two. And while that's running, what I wanted to do is talk about one of our new query acceleration features. So I mentioned this briefly in the beginning. We, in version 8, added the ability to enable smart summaries summary queries, summary views, that basically act as an accelerator. So these are very similar to aggregation awareness that you would see in reporting tools and OLAP engines. And the basic idea is if you have a fact table that's maybe all the data stored at the day level, we can create a summary view that's basically aggregating that data maybe at the monthly level. And then Denodo at runtime, based on the optimizer, can pick and choose which of these summaries it plans to use. Okay, so if I go back over, let me show you the net result. Okay, so this query came back, and if I look at the actual, let me get rid of this. If I look at the actual runtime, it took about 17 seconds, which is okay. I can see the data movement was applied, so it applied all the optimizations. And for an ad hoc query, 17 seconds on a query like this is fine. But what if I now want to turn this into a query that gets used in a dashboard? Okay, so some of you may have noticed when I first ran this, I clicked the do not use cache. The reason for that is I had already created a summary view ahead of time. So I've created a summary view already for this particular query. And so if I allow it, if I unclick that, that means that it's now going to use this as a candidate for this particular query, okay? So if I click the query plan now, instead of it going out to all 3 sources, now it just has to go out to that one summary table and return the results. So if I look here, now the optimizations applied are just summary rewrite, and you'll see when I run the query, it should come back in a couple of seconds, okay? So that's kind of the process of, first exploring, finding data that's of value. Once you find it's of value and you want to, quote unquote, maybe productionalize it or make it a dashboard, it's very easy to go from there to creating, like sub-second response on your queries by just adding a summary view. Okay? Now so once this view is created, the next step is to make it available to the end users. So I'm going to go back to my opening here, and I'm going to open my data catalog, which is my end user tool. And I'm going to go ahead and, so the opening screen here for the data catalog, we like to present this as being like the, like Google for your Denodo data, right? So we wanted to be a very simple screen so you could just come in and search for whatever you wanted. So if I just type in campaign, it's going to come back with a ranked search of the campaign, all the views that have campaign in it, okay? So let's take a look at this one. So when I take a look at the view, if I want to validate it for my end user, typically the first thing that I'm going to do is take a look at the lineage and make sure that the lineage map looks okay. Okay, so the lineage map is fully interactive. So the first thing I want to validate is to make sure that the data sources are correct, and those are all coming from the right place. And they are, so that you can see CRM, that's the CRM database. If I click over here on any of the columns, it's going to show me exactly where that column came from. So in this case, promotion is coming from my web service. Year is going to be coming from my date dimension. And even a calculated field like total, it's going to show me the field that was used in the calculation, and it's also going to show me the actual calculation itself. Okay, so so the lineage all looks correct, and I'm okay with what I see, at least from the logical standpoint. So the last step would be to go ahead and run a query against the data. So once that result set comes back, if I want to further investigate it, I can go ahead and export it to a number of formats, including Tableau, or I could just go over here and connect to it directly. So if I click on the Tableau button, that's going to create a connect file to connect Tableau directly to this view. If I was to click on that connectivity button, it shows me all the options for how I can connect to this particular view. Okay? So, so once this has been, so once the end user comes in and they validate that this, is everything they want, at that point now they can just go ahead and connect with their BI tool. They can use one of the connect strings and go ahead and develop their report. Okay. Now, the last demo that I wanted to show you is around semantic models. So the concept here, and this is very similar and very common in a lot of customers that we see. The example here is we have a sample retailer that was a traditional in-store retailer that has grown through acquisitions. They always had a Oracle Enterprise Data Warehouse has always been the focal point for their business intelligence. And they've recently had several acquisitions around catalog and web sales. And those acquisitions have all come with their own DSS tools. So rather than doing a physical consolidation, they decided to deploy a logical data warehouse for a unified company view. And much of the analysis will continue to be sales channel specific, but they also wanted to give people like the CFO a very broad across the sales channel view of how sales are looking. So these are the data sources that are in my my demo today, and these are all live data sources. So we've got 3 REST APIs that we also want to incorporate. We got an inventory management, CRM, and a couple data marts. So the goal here is we want to minimize disruption as much as possible. We want to allow a single connectivity solution for all BI cases, and we want to enable cross-channel analytics. Okay, so what we've done is if I go over to my design tool, okay. So if I go to my design tool, you can see under the connectivity layer, I already have all these data sources in place. So I've got my SQL Server data marts, I've got my Oracle EDW, so on and so forth. So what we've done here in this integration layer is we've created a handful of detailed views. So what we want to do is basically we're creating content for end users that aren't really SQL savvy. So we don't want them to have to create their own tables. So we're basically going to pre-join a series of relevant tables together so that they can just pick and choose the columns that they want. Okay, so if I look under the finance folder, you can see I basically have a detailed view for each of the lines of business: catalog sales, store sales, and web sales. So let's take a look at what exactly is going on here. So if we look at the construction of these views, basically we have a star schema. A little messy. There we go. So we have a catalog sales fact star schema that is joined to a date dimension, the item dimension, and the customer address and customer dimension. Okay. So all of these detail views are all pre-joined to the same dimensions. And so these are the core dimensions that we're going to need for financial analysis. And so at the end of the day, what we've done is we've just created a view that has all of the key measures and all of the key attributes that our finance team needs for doing their analysis. Okay, so once I've created basically a pre-joined star schema for each of those individual lines of business, what we then did for the office of the CFO is we created a view called All Sales Finance that incorporates all the lines of business. Okay, so this one is I'm going to show you in the BI tool. So this one is going to include every line of business that we have. And let me show it to you up here. So if we look under finance, it's all sales by region, channel, quarter. If I look at the lineage, you can see it's basically a union of each of those individual detail views. Okay, so if I expand this, so this is store sales, this is web sales, and this is catalog sales. Okay, so now if I'm say the CFO and I want to run a report for all sales by region, channel, year, now I just have a single view that I can go in and run, and that query is actually now going across all those fact tables. So it's 3 different fact tables and several different dimensions all being brought together for this one consolidated view. If you look at the lineage, you can see it's a pretty broad query. Now, that's useful for someone that needs to be able to see everything across the board. But what about an end user that is focused just on store sales? Well, here I have a Power BI report that is accessing the exact same query. So you can see it's all sales by region, channel, year. But you'll notice that the result set is decidedly smaller. Okay, and the reason for that is this user is limited to only having access to the store sales channel and the East region. So this is a store manager on the East, and so they don't need to have access to catalog sales and web sales. And so by accessing the same view with different credentials, we're just delivering the data that they need. So those are my demos and presentation. I guess now I'd like to turn it over to Q&A.
Nice demo. Very nice demo, Ed. You got a lot in there. And where are you seeing demand for a platform like Denodo at?
I would say probably the 2 most common use cases that we get presented with, like when I go into a POC, one would be Customer 360, so augmented customer view. I feel like almost every insurance company that I talk to has a need to see one consolidated view of their customer across every policy and claim they've ever made, because they have lots of different systems. The other one would be hybrid cloud. So everybody, it seems like today, has some sort of cloud strategy, and getting to that sort of end state presents a lot of challenges. And that's probably one of the most valuable areas that Denodo is helping customers, is how do we take some of our existing on-prem assets and move those to the cloud without disruption?
Well, so I'm no expert, so I'm going to kind of work my way through this question because it's a little more detailed.
Sure.
So it's basically asking around performance issues. If I didn't require data from one of the dimensions, how do you avoid querying data sources that aren't required?
Oh, okay. So that's one of our built-in optimizations. So it's basically it's something called branch pruning. So let me give you a quick example of that. So if I go into the design studio here, and in this case I'm going to query this all sales finance, right? So this is pulling data from catalog, web, and as well as store sales. So here we have, so this is the view that I showed you before called all sales by year or by quarter, excuse me. So if I don't apply a predicate here, if I just say do a select star, you look at the query plan, it's pretty big, right? It's going across lots and lots of stuff. I see the execution plan. It's basically doing some data movement, but since we're just asking for all the details, it doesn't do a lot of optimizations. If I go back here and I just apply a predicate. So in this case, rather than asking for sales across every channel, I only want sales from the web channel. Now when I do, you'll see the plan looks much smaller, and the reason for that is we applied something called branch pruning. So basically, what it did is it determined based on that predicate that we don't need any information from store sales or catalog sales. So it just completely ignores those branches of the view, and it's only going to query the branch relative to web sales.
I think that was a great answer,
Okay.
as far as I know. I do have a question though, with regard to people are asking how do people engage? How do they get started? You know, is there kind of a path to start talking? Is there a trial? How long
absolutely.
does it take?
So
that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we actually have several test drives that people can sign up for free. We will provision a demo environment in either Google Cloud, AWS, or Azure. If you go to our homepage or you just search for Denodo test drive, you'll see the link to it. And we basically provision a fully enabled environment with data sets, and there's a 2-hour workshop that you can work through at your own pace to get more hands-on with the tool. So I would encourage you to start with that. And if you want to go beyond that, just find one of our sales guys.
How do you see this applied to the retail industry?
Applied to the retail industry?
Yes.
So one of the big areas of retail that we initially got started with was data warehouse offloading. So people that had legacy Oracle Teradata systems, they wanted to move some of that to either Hadoop or move it to the cloud. Denodo plays a big role with that. And also with the example that I gave you before, where lots of retailers acquire smaller companies or big companies or whatever, and those all come with their own DSS assets. So retailers have as much data as anybody, and so just putting a semantic model on top of it at the logical layer makes it a lot easier to access everything.
Another one, I want to apply this to a hybrid model where we have a lot of on-prem DBS, DBs, and Azure Data Lake.
Okay. Yeah. So that's actually one of our very common use cases. So what we typically see is customers have, let's say in Azure, they would have Azure Data Lake and maybe say like one other data source, and then they have on-prem multiple data sources. What we typically do there is put a Denodo server in the cloud, so in this case in Azure, and a Denodo server on-prem. And the two Denodo servers basically talk to each other. So it minimizes the amount of data that has to go back and forth across the cloud network. And also, gives us a lot of optimization capabilities for those servers that are in place.
Would you be able to further describe zero replication characteristics of the Denodo platform?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one of the analogies that I think works really well for people is that Denodo, for those that are familiar with a tankless water heater versus a traditional water heater where you have all the hot water in place. So a tankless water heater just heats the water as it comes through. And that's really how Denodo works. So when we say that we do not persist data, basically the Denodo server sits between the data source and the BI tool. And the BI tool sends a query to Denodo. Denodo turns that into a call to the data source and then returns the data to the end user. So Denodo is acting as a pass-through mechanism. We're not trying to create a better mousetrap to scan data faster or to read data faster or crunch data any faster. We're really more of an intelligent traffic cop. So it's more about understanding the fastest way to get, to get a query solved based on the assets that we have available to us.
So a question that has been asked, which actually is relevant given the fact that you released 8.0 in August. I think you mentioned you've got another release coming up in January.
Yes.
And so one of the questions is, how do you handle application upgrades?
Yeah. So Denodo, so basically, one of the other nice things about it's not persisting data is that Denodo, at the end of the day, there isn't a lot of data to manage with upgrades. So the Denodo metadata layer, the metadata repository, is, a big metadata repository would be like maybe 2 or 3 gigabytes. So a typical upgrade is an export of the metadata. You import, you stand up the new version of Denodo and then import the metadata. So most of our customers are able to do upgrades in a matter of a couple of days, with including all the testing. It's fairly straightforward.
So another one, what guidance would you give for when Denodo gets to a point that virtualization no longer makes sense versus physically moving all of your data assets to a central data solution like Snowflake?
Well, I don't know. I mean, listen, I spent 20 years at Oracle, and we were trying to get people to put everything in one database for 20 years. So I think that's a bit of a moving target. So I know that every database vendor in the world would like you to have all their data in their database, but I've yet to see a customer that does that. So what I would say is it's going to continue to be an evolving situation where you'll have the preponderance of your data may be in Snowflake, but you're still going to have people creating data in spreadsheets and data marts, in S3 buckets and all over the place. And Denodo basically just serves as that layer on top. But if people feel like, they've managed to solve the world's biggest problem and get all their data into one database, I'm more than happy to find out how they did it.
Outstanding. All right. Well, this was a great demo, great discussion. I have a question. One last parting question. You do have a new release coming up in January. Anything you want to share that you might be able to? Yeah. So
we typically release quarterly updates to our products that are typically more like incremental improvements and bug fixes. But one of the things in the next release, it's a fairly major release, is we are redesigning the data catalog and adding a lot more collaboration features. So going forward, the data catalog, you'll have the ability to upvote and downvote on data assets, recommend views to other people. And it'll also have a recommendation engine to say, okay, based on the views that you've looked at in the past and what other people are looking at, you may want to check out these views. So we're trying to make it more user-friendly for the non-technical person to be able to find what they need to do their job.
Outstanding. Ed, thanks very much for all of that information about Denodo. We would certainly encourage everybody to go check out Denodo's website and all of the information that they provide there, which is quite substantial.
And try the test drives. The test drives are very useful.
And give it a test drive, sure.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks very much. And we will be back at the top of the hour with our next demo, so stay tuned. Thanks.
Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome back to Data Demo Day. Next up is Alation. And if you don't know Alation, you should. They're the first company to bring a data catalog to market. The Alation data catalog combines machine learning and human collaboration to change the way people find, understand, trust, use, and reuse data. More than 200 organizations leverage the Alation data catalog right now, and we are joined by Nick Colley, sales engineer at Alation. Nick, are you with us?
Well, let's get this thing on the road.
All right. You and I had a chance to chat a little earlier, and you are actually a former client of Alation. Is that correct?
Correct. So prior to joining Alation, I was a data science team lead and a member of the corporate data governance board for a large multinational manufacturing company, where as a data scientist, it would take me like 3 months to ramp up on a project. And as a member of the corporate data governance board, we didn't even know where to begin. How to start implementing our policies across all of our data, finding the data. So I led the effort to go out and find a data catalog to bring it in, and so I ended up rolling out Alation. So it's been a really cool opportunity to be not only a customer of Alation, but now working for Alation and seeing on both sides of it.
All right, great. So we're going to get out of the way. We would expect that you would probably give us a little bit more deeper overview of Alation, and then walk through a demo, and then we'll come back in about a half an hour, and I'll have a chat with you, take some questions from the folks attending, and we'll wrap it up. But I'll talk to you in a little bit.
Sounds good. So hi everybody. So a little background on Alation. Alation, we got started a little over 7 years ago. We started as a analyst productivity tool because it was something that we find that, you know, when we look at the data journey, we look at it backwards. We usually look at, okay, we need to do the ETL tools, we need to do this, we need to do that. But when we look at the beginning of the journey for a data scientist and data analyst, we're looking at it from a, what does this data even mean? Can I trust this data? Very basic but very hard questions that can be answered. And we started, you know, with our first customer at eBay, and now have over 280 customers. And what's been great about having started as a data analyst productivity tool is we've been able to build it so that the end users want to use the data catalog. And this was something that really spoke to me as a data scientist, because it's all about going out and finding that data you need. And then by having the data governance on top of that and all the different components for compliance, risk analysis, you know, we have a lot of different use cases, including cloud transformation. We're enabling companies to go out and better understand data and dive into it. So let's dive into the demo and get into there. So in the words of the smash hit from 1990s Jurassic Park, welcome to Alation. So Alation is all about making it easy for you to go in, find, trust, and understand that data. And we do this through a couple different methods. One of our methods is broad and deep connectivity. Alation has connectors to over 85 different connectors out of the box. That makes it easy for us to go in. So we have a lot of breadth, and then we have a lot of depth, because we're able to derive a lot of cool benefits from those connections. And you're going to see those, and I'll call those out. Right now, I'm logged in as a data analyst, so I can come in here and easily see what's going on and find stuff. So think about this from a perspective is, when you first started your data journey, what questions did you have about the data? What were you looking at? How long did it take you to ramp up? And then compare it to what we're going to show. And I'll be honest, like, yes, this is a demo environment, but this is what I experienced as a data scientist once we deployed Alation. So whenever we start as a new analyst, the first thing I always recommend is to go out and start with BI tools, start with BI reports, because that means someone's taken data, turned it into information, transformed it to knowledge, into actions, right? So if we're at a marketing firm, the first place I would look is segments, right? So I can come in and type in, I can search customer, and I can go in and find segments, and we can then come over here and start searching. So we can see what Alation is doing is it is searching across the entire data catalog, whether it's your data sources, whether it's your BI tools, whether it's your you know, your documentation. Alation is bringing all this back to us, and we can come over here and we can additionally filter it. So let's start with the BI reports, because that's a great place to start diving in and seeing what's there. So we're getting a listing back of a bunch of BI reports that will allow us to see, you know, that information. And I apologize, I'm on my backup computer, so I'm gonna, and my G key is not working for whatever reason. So I'm gonna jump right into a BI report that that we were supposed to dive into. So here we're in the customer segments, and we can see that here's the breadcrumb trail of where we're landing and where this report is pulling from. And before I dive in, I can see that there's an issue with the data. This report is based on old customer segmentation model. A dashboard based on the new customer demographic model is here. And this is powerful because, you know, we went from searching to then landing on a report that we didn't know was the right one to use, but we can see that someone has already documented and communicated out, hey, do not use this report. We want to use this report instead. This is powerful because now this is building that trust into the data. If I was signed in Tableau and I had the permissions to see this report, I would see that report right there along with this documentation. I can also come over here and say, please refer to the PII data policy before using this data. I can see that Sally also endorses. So this is the person that deprecated the last report. So within just a minute of clicking and searching, I landed on the BI report that I needed to be on. We can see the fields. We can see how those are calculated. Yes, it does handle complex calculations. We can come over here and we can see the lineage, and this is really powerful because the lineage is automatic out of the box day one. So I can see from this dashboard what the source tables are coming from. This is huge because now as a new person to the team, I'm not having to go in, open the Tableau dashboard, see the data connection. I can see this automatically. And I can come over here and click on this and see all the documentation at my fingertips. So this is a great way to just dive in and open this up. Now I'm going to take a step out for a second from that new analyst role because we just went from searching to landing on the BI report to then landing on the this table page. Think about your current data journey. How do your analysts, how do your data scientists do that? How are you notifying them, hey, is this trusted data? Is this not trusted data? Now it's built into that workflow. So we landed on a random table from the lineage. We could also have gotten there from search. We can see, the database, the breadcrumb trail again, the schema and the table. We can also see the logical name and the physical name that is in the database. And this is really cool because this is where one of the secret sauces of Alation kicks in. It's barbecue-ish, tangy, but it's nice. So what it's doing is we have machine learning built into the catalog that is taking any documentation you bring into Alation, whether it's a description of the table, whether it's documentation through our articles, and it's using that knowledge and it's going to start breaking up these naming conventions and start taking guesses. What does CSTMR mean? It means customer. What does DMS mean? It means demographics. And the reason why I call this out is this is automation at scale. So now you're not having to think about it as a new analyst. How long did it take you to ramp up and understand all those little acronyms that you had or those abbreviations you had in your databases, right? And then you come across that random one. Let's use machine learning and automate that guess. Think about the widest table that you have. My previous company, I had a table that was 430 columns wide. Do you think a steward's going to go out and name those manually? Let's automate that. And yes, that was my table. I may or may not have created a table with all my features for a model as a column. So I can see the description, and I can also see who the top users are in this table. So this is really helpful. So if I have a question about, who is Sally Stewart, then I can easily jump in and ask her that question. And I can do that over here in the conversations. Because if I had a question about data quality or migration, I can expand this and see that, hey, is there enough data in the cust ID field to make this useful? Just spoke with Sally. This data goes back 5 years. So now it's enabling self-service. So if I already had a question, instead of going to Danny or to Sally, someone's already asked, David already asked, and Ben responded. So now it's, I don't have to go and bother them. I already been informed of that knowledge. One of our customers in pharmaceuticals, 80% of their analyst questions are now getting answered in conversations. Think about the impact. That's massive time to insights increase that you're getting. We can also, I can scroll down, see some sample columns content, as well as seeing, okay, there's some data quality info, there's some data sensitivity there. Okay, it's giving me some context what's going on. But wait, what if I was looking for more description? I can click on this question button. Oh, it's grabbing those top users and going to shoot them a notification saying, hey, can you describe this a little bit more? So now it's leveraging that crowdsourcing mentality. So for all those tables that you don't have descriptions of, leverage those top users. These top users are coming from the query logs. I talked about how we have deep connectivity. Alation is going to connect those data sources and read the logs and pull back that information to expose it. Coming across, I can see the columns. I can see the physical column name and the logical or business column name. I can see that there's primary key, a couple foreign keys, and these two columns are indexes. Excellent. So if I want to perform queries, I need to make sure that I can do some searching off these indexes. I can also see popularity. This is really fascinating. So because Alation is aware how people are using the data, because we're with our deep connectivity to the data sources, we're going to start showing you how popular these objects are all the way down to the column level. There's some more that you're going to see with that popularity come back in a little bit, because we not only track it at the column level, but we'll also track it at the table level. So if you're trying to move tables, figure out what tables to move to the cloud for your analytics team, you'll be able to know what are the most popular tables. Coming across, we can see some sample data. We can see that the data stored is marked, this is sensitive, so that we can come in and not reveal that PII. We can come across and see how people are filtering on this data and joining on this data. Oh, okay, this is cool. So now I'm starting to see the behavioral analysis of the data, so of like how people are actually leveraging it. And I can see people have actually come in and have named these. That's really handy. Okay. And then I can see the lineage. So I can see what all downstream is coming off this table, what's being leveraged off this, as well as seeing how people are querying against this data. So here we can see, that there's customer demographic totals, and I can see, well, that's interesting. That doesn't look like normal query text. What's going on here? So I can go into this. So what we were just in is what was called published queries. So as an analyst, or as a data scientist, or as a governance person, we all talk about corporate KPIs, right? And the need to have standardization when it comes to sharing that knowledge and to make sure that everyone's pulling back the same data. Well, now you can publish those queries so that people know, hey, this is the way to pull back this data. You can use that in conjunction with our glossary so that people can then go in and find that, and we'll see that glossary in a minute. So going back into that query, I can see this query has been endorsed. I can also see a description about it, sweet. And then I see this little run form button. What this run form button will do is it will allow me to come in and remember that little funky text I called out? It's making that query that usually is static become dynamic. So now I can come in here and search active, and yes, I want to get notified. Let's do it. Awesome. And we're getting back the knowledge of all of our active customers. So now it's, I didn't have to write a query, and I'm already pulling back data, getting an instinct of what does our customer segment look like by demographic that are currently active customers. Beautiful. So within just a few minutes, we've gone from looking at a BI report to then landing on it, going and finding the right BI report to be using, not the incorrect one, to then landing on the table and pulling back data without even having to write a query yet. This is powerful, and this is what started attracting me as a customer of Alation to Alation, because it enables that self-service, it enables that knowledge sharing off the get-go. If this is a query I wanted to start using, awesome. I can open up Compose, and I can bring back, I can start working on this data. So Compose is Alation's SQL IDE. That is to say it's our SQL editing tool. So you can come in here and you can start writing queries. You can start adding, and modifying it. And right now, this query is owned by Sally. If I come over here and clone it, I can then modify it and make it my own query. It has full IntelliSense, which is really nice. But what's cool is because Alation's aware of how people are filtering and joining, when I come down here to filters and joins, it's going to leverage all that knowledge and start prompting me with it. I can also come over here and mouse over and see, hey, this customer DMS, it has that PII, it has those warnings on it. And this is powerful because this is your governance at scale. Because think about it, you've got this, we had a 175-page corporate data governance document. If you have PII, do this. If you have this data, do this. But it was on a shared drive someplace that most analysts didn't know where to even find it, right? This is now taking your governance and making it active because it's part of the data, a part of the querying, and it's all there at your fingertips. This is massive. I can also see all the sample data, and I can see all the documentation. I'm not having to have multiple monitors up. I can come over here and I can run it, I can export it, I can also download the data results and go right into Tableau with it if I wanted to. Compose was one of my favorite tools of Alation as a data scientist, because what I ended up doing is I ended up using it as my source of truth for all of my queries for my machine learning models. Because one, I knew if there was any governance changes to these documents, like, hey, there's a PII governance, it would tell me, it would notify me, it would let me know what was going on. And then it would also give me impact analysis. I remember I had a couple of queries I'd written, and I was following a couple of tables that I built my data off of. And one of my tables that I had written off of, I had watched it. So the all-seeing eye here, right? And 2 hours before one of my presentations was a new dashboard, I got a notification. Hey, the deprecation was issued. Bad ETL job last night. Data push failed. Past 48 hours, the data was incorrect. Okay, awesome. So what I did, I walked into that meeting, showed them that email, and said, hey, just FYI, the past 48 hours of data, bad. I talked to the stewards, they're gonna have a resolution in play. Everything past that was good. They said, okay. It built trust in me because I was able to explain why we were seeing the little wigglies, and also build that confidence in them that, hey, everything after that's good, and they knew what was going to be fixed going forward. So it was a great way to communicate out. The queries I'd written against that table also got flagged saying, hey, FYI, this is kind of important for you to know. Okay, enough of that part. I'm going to talk about glossaries for a minute. So Alation supports glossaries out of the box, where you can go in and each division can have its own glossary. This is really handy because now, we've been there. Different divisions measure the same KPI just a little bit differently, right? Well, now those divisions can have documentation so users can come in there and find it and see, what does this mean? How are we measuring this? And it's great because now we can start building this out. And what makes our documentation and our glossaries different is that we can come over here and I can expand this and see the sample data or see the queries or see the BI reports right there built into the glossary term itself. So it's giving me that additional context. It's giving me that additional context. So what we're going to do is I'm going to transition over to our data steward role, and she's going to have a different view of how this data looks. So here I'm logged in as Sally as a data steward. If I come in here into the glossaries, we can now see this tab being opened up. And this is really powerful because this tab is suggested terms. So I talked about how Alation is tracking popularity of all the way down to the column level and how we're using the machine learning to break apart the abbreviations and taking guesses at what those means, right? Well, now Alation is going to use that knowledge and by popularity across all these data sources, start recommending, hey, we're seeing a lot of amounts with the term amount. There's 222 objects associated to this. If I know there's other abbreviations for this, I can come in here and I can add that abbreviation, and Alation will update this list. Cool, Nick, how is this going to help me? Well, now I can come over here and I can attach this to an existing glossary term, or I can create a glossary term to it. And by clicking this button, what it's going to do is it will automatically associate the glossary term to all of those amounts automatically. And anytime there's a new column added or table added, this glossary term will automatically be added there. So it's leveraging the at scale and automation to help you reach your data governance things. This was massive. But in the words of those infomercials at 2 a.m., but wait, there's more. So I can come down here and I can see there's an assigned stewards. This was impactful for us because as corporate data governance, we were previously talking to our colleagues, hey, what data is important to you? Marketing, what data are you using? And then we would come together and go, all right, we think marketing has the most important data, right? That's not efficient, it's not scalable, also inaccurate. Because Alation's tracking that popularity, again, from the column level, Alation will provide you a enterprise level view that says, across all these data objects, across all these data sources, by popularity, there's no steward assigned here. Start here, pass, go, collect your $200 for your data governance. So your data governance currency, yay. You can assign this to a user or to a group. So if you have a governance team, boom, set them off and get them going. This, right? Like I got excited when I saw this. Like, oh, this is amazing, because this was the compass that guided us more. But don't worry, if you're a steward, we also got your back. Because we'll be able to provide you, as Sally, a dashboard that shows you, what your inbox is at. If you've been assigned specific tasks, it looks like I have a couple of things that need my review. I've got a couple of questions I need to dive into, as well as seeing, if there have been any changes on the catalog, I would see those changes there, as well as seeing the curation. And I can go into my curation progress as Sally. And again, across all my data sources, from database all the way down to the columns, by popularity, where my curation progress is at. So now I know with confidence where I need to be focusing my efforts, where I need to be pointing my next bit of curation and governance efforts. Anytime I get assigned new objects, this dashboard updates in real time. You don't have to wait for some cron job report to come out. In addition, Alation has a rules engine that will allow you to go out and pull back the data and set governance at scale across the entire catalog. This is really powerful because now if you need to start implementing PII policies or masking data, you can do that through our rules engine, and it doesn't require a programmer. The last story I will leave you with from my personal experience was, I had a data analyst transition to a different team, right? And when they transitioned, I backfilled that position and I said, hey, go take a look at your predecessor's profile. Go look at, Sally's profile and go look at what their expertise is. Go look at what queries they publish, what conversations they've been a part of. Because Alation is going to automatically generate the expertise. It's automatically going to show you what groups they're part of, what they're steward of, as well as what they've been publishing and sharing with the groups. The reason I call this out is this is going to help your analysts, your data scientists, your end consumers start ramping up a lot faster. Because then they can see what their predecessor worked on or what their colleague worked on. Think about those stamps, the endorsements, right? Where we saw Sally's endorsement. Well, she had endorsed a lot of demographic and segment data. If we look at her expertise, she's in a lot of these expertise. Okay, great. I'm now getting that context. By the end of that first week, the data analyst was able to generate their first BI report because they had this additional context within Alation, and it didn't require 3 months like it did for me to ramp up inside of Alation. So this is Alation at a 30K foot view where we went from searching for customer segments, to then landing and finding the BI report we needed, to then knowing, hey, this, this is interesting. This is a different customer segments data. This does not contain, this isn't seasonal data. So again, it's providing that context and going in there. So this is Alation at that 30K foot view that allows you to go in there. And what I want to do is I want to open it up and see if we have any questions. And it looks like we do have a question. What BI tools does Alation have connectors for? Oh, that's great. So some of our most popular ones, we've got, Tableau, Power BI, and a slew of others that my brain is suddenly forgetting. But we do have a slew of those connectors. So it's very easy to go in and bridge that connection. All of our connectors are done through the user interface. And as a data steward or as a data source steward, you can set when Alation will automatically extract that through the user interface as well.
Hey, Nick, it's Doug. That was an excellent presentation. Here at Solutions Review, we think a lot about where spaces are going. Your solution is really a reflection of the kind of data democratization that is happening right now, and how people think about, how users think about data rather than data scientists think about data.
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head as data democratization, because there's a lot of different tools out there that claim to be data catalogs or that do governance, and they're top-down, oppressive, and they're like, "Rawr, do the thing," and you're like, "Ah." And whenever you're in those systems, unless it's built into your workflow on a day-to-day basis, and I speak to this as I work for a German European company, and they are very top-down, you're less likely to use it. But if there's a tool that enables data democratization, that allows you to go in and encourages you to go find the data and is useful from the end user perspective, we can leverage that crowdsourcing knowledge. We can, it'll naturally encourage people to go in and find the data. Because what we found was when we deployed Alation, we would start documenting, and then people go, "Hey, do you have this data?" And I would send them the link to the table or to the column where I documented that information. And they'd be like, "Awesome." And then they became a user because they started seeing the benefits of Alation, and it just enabled people to find the data a lot faster while still being secure within our compliance that we needed.
Well, so with regard to users, one of the questions that I have is, who are the typical main users of Alation in an organization?
Ooh, great question. So what we found is it's generally, we have a lot of data analysts, data scientists that'll come in and use it, governance people, but we also have a lot of analysts that aren't necessarily query writers or business users that are just trying to see if there's a BI report that exists that has been, that has been validated saying this is the right BI report. So my non-technical director would go into Alation and find data that he was looking for, send me a link going, "Hey, make a modification to this by 20%. I was in a Six Sigma group, so he would rely on me on all the tech stuff. So it mainly data scientists, data analysts, but also business users would come in and find that data they were looking for.
So with regard to your experience, what was the driver that brought Alation into your work?
This is kind of embarrassing, but also kind of funny. So I got tired of taking so long to find data. So I went ahead and started building out my own data catalog internally, thinking, "Oh, this should be easy." No, it's not. No, it is not. And once, I did it with my blessings of a couple of different managers. And once they found out that, hey, one of our data scientists is building a data catalog, why is he doing that? Let's go get a solution that is properly supported and has more features than just listing the metadata. That's what was the impetus that did it. So they're like, well, if you were building it, you're leading the effort to go find it.
Well, these are the kind of questions that actually are interesting to me, and I think our audience, because I think ultimately our audience, typically at Solutions Reviewers, is looking for the next generation of solution. They're looking to begin to test and explore new solutions. So with regard to that, how does somebody start to engage Alation in a consideration cycle? Is there a trial? Are there kind of easy paths to test?
Oh, yes. There are very easy paths to get into testing. The first thing is to reach out to Alation, and our contact information is provided. When you reach out, we'll put you in touch with an account executive, and they'll work with you to figure out what's going to be the easiest, fastest way to get us up. We have a couple different ways of doing it, from proof of concepts to doing like cloud, where we spin up a cloud instance so you can interact with it, see it. We can toss your data on there if you wanted. That's kind of what I do, is I do a lot of the technical interactions as well as interacting with the business leaders to show, hey, I can say firsthand that like Alation does what they say they do. It's something that's really powerful for me, because it's like I was there. And so that's, yeah. So it's very easy for you to test Alation out, TLDR.
So with regard to testing Alation out, what should people be thinking about? I mean, where should they be coming from a strategic perspective internally?
So the first thing is, do you have executive backing on this? Like, you know, yes, you have the interest, that's awesome, but like making sure this is important for them, and looking at what is mainly driving it. Is it risk compliance? Is it governance? Is it, you know, data curation? Is it, you're trying to do cloud migration? We have a lot of different use cases that Alation gets utilized for. Are you trying to improve the life of a data scientist, data analyst? Are you trying to see that ROI improvement there? Because Alation can bring that. Salesforce, one of our customers, their data scientists are able to turn around reports much faster now because of Alation. We have case studies on a lot of our different customers you can find on our website that will talk about the improvements there. So it really depends on, you know, you can see, if you start seeing the benefits now, we can work with you. That's selfish response, but the true answer is, like, if you're just trying to do governance, if you're trying to help improve your data analysts, or you're trying to do risk compliance like GDPR, PII, we got you covered there.
I got a couple of questions that have come in. What is Alation's software update schedule?
Great question. So at the time of this recording, right now we do 4 releases, major releases a year. Those are feature releases. And then we do, every 2 weeks, do a patch. And then you can install any point of those, and it will include all the past stuff too. And one thing that really stood out is our updates and installation. We can install within an hour and be connected to a data source, and you're already off to the races running. Our updates take 20 minutes. Like, it's super quick, very easy to deploy and manage.
Excellent. Another question. This is a softball, but we'll throw it at you. What Alation customer case study do you think is most impressive?
Ooh, now this is a interesting one. So I'm going to start at a very high level and say, first, go look at our alation.com/customers. One thing you'll notice there is that we have customers that will span all the major verticals, from video games to insurance to manufacturing. We have, you know, a lot of different customers using us for different things. One of my favorite ones is probably Munich Re, and because once you start plugging in your data sources to Alation, enabling people to go out, your end users, your business people, your analysts, data scientists, going out and finding the data, you're going to start seeing some really cool results, because Munich Re was actually able to generate a whole new line of business because of Alation. And like the case study talks about it, because their analysts went out there and found out, hey, we don't have windmill insurance, and this is a growing vertical. And they were able to discover that because they were looking at, you know, the data that they had in their system to generate. So that's one of my favorite ones to talk about.
Well, excellent. You pulled it off. Well done. We appreciate it very much. We would certainly encourage everybody attending this and watching this to go to alation.com and check out not only those case studies, but all the ways that they're bringing data catalog to the market. It's a very compelling thought and an interesting solution that I think a lot of people should get to know. So we'll be coming back at the top of the hour. Nick, thanks very much again for all your time. Please stay tuned, and we'll get to our third demo of the demo day. Thanks.
Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome back to Data Demo Day. Over the past couple hours, we've been working our way through demonstrations of some really interesting, compelling solutions. We've tackled data virtualization, we've tackled data catalogs, and next we're going to get into data integration. And we're going to talk to Matillion. If you're looking at data integration solutions, you need to have Matillion on your radar. They've been solving challenges with data and the cloud since 2011. Matillion provides powerful, easy-to-use data integration and ETL products. They can help organizations of all sizes integrate, transform, and data with 4 products. Matillion ETL for Amazon Redshift, Matillion ETL for Snowflake, Matillion ETL for Google BigQuery, and Matillion Data Loader. And we are joined today by Naval, who is Solution Architect at Matillion. Thanks for joining us, Naval.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because you're batting cleanup, which means you're going to need to bring the big demo. And honestly, we've had some really interesting demos so far, and I've already seen the Matillion one, and I know it's outstanding. Before we get into it, though, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Matillion and why you're, busily working on their behalf.
Yeah. So I've been in the data space for about 16 years. So when I came across the product, I used it a little bit, and then I got the opportunity to work for the company. And just looking at the product, the enterprise level solution that we provide, it's a great product to be able to help customers adopt and get their data journey started with.
That's a common theme that we've heard so far through everybody. And it's always nice to hear that you not only are representing the product, but that you have a real genuine belief in how it came about and why you're there. And obviously, being there 16 years, you've seen the evolution of Matillion, and I know you're going to get into a demo, but for the next half hour, why don't you take us through a little bit of an overview of Matillion, walk through the demo, and provide the inside look that we're all looking forward to, and then we'll come back in about a half an hour, and we'll connect with some questions and answers.
Yeah, sounds good. Happy to do that. Let me start sharing my screen here. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to be able to showcase Matillion at the Data Demo Day. I'm Naval. I'm a solution architect at Matillion. I'm excited to give you guys an overview of Matillion, the company itself, product, and then walk you guys through the technical demo. The agenda for today, I'll just give a quick introduction of myself, my background. We'll do a quick overview of Matillion, walk you through some slides of what Matillion is and what value we bring to the customers, and then I'll walk you through a technical demo. And at the end, we'll go through a Q&A session. All right, so my background in the data space, as I said earlier, I've been a developer, I've been a lead developer, I've been an architect in various different organizations. The first 11 years of that journey was as a consultant. So I was fortunate enough to be able to work with various different technologies, ETL tools, databases, which really helped build that scope or variety of implementations in various different companies I've worked at. I've been working with cloud platforms for about 4 to 5 years now, and now I'm at Matillion, helping customers succeed in their cloud journey. All right, so let's look at the overview of Matillion. So what is Matillion? Matillion is a cloud-native ETL tool. So we help customers do the extract, load, as well as transform. We work on the ELT architecture, and we have products to connect to all the different cloud data warehouses. So Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, Synapse, and we recently released the Databricks Delta Lake product. The value that Matillion brings to customers is first simplicity. The UI is an intuitive UI where you have a drag and drop interface, which makes development very easy. Scale, and that just comes with Matillion being cloud native. Speed, the way Matillion is deployed in that cloud native fashion of the marketplace, you are deployed and up and running with Matillion within 15 to 20 minutes. And once you have it, you start developing, you start getting that quicker time to value with getting those in data. And then savings, we have a pay-as-you-go model, so you are only paying for what you use. What are the common challenges nowadays? Let's take a quick look at that. So most companies nowadays do not have one data source. There is multiple, and not just 2 or 3. There is like always a whole bunch of data sources that have those different types of data that the organization is looking at, or wants to look at. And the challenge there is the variety of as well, meaning different file formats, different databases. And it's always a challenge with that much variety of data to integrate it and then to be able to transform it to make some insightful data structures that you can analyze. Volume of data is always increasing day by day. So you need a tool that can handle enterprise level volumes of data to help you get to those reporting structures. How does Matillion deploy? So Matillion is cloud native. So it sits right next to your cloud data warehouse, and it can connect to APIs, applications, different databases, and get that data as is. We call it EL architecture. Get that data as is raw data into your cloud data warehouse. And once there, Matillion uses push-down transformations to transform that data, apply business rules, and create your persistent structures. All right, so let's get into the demo. Let me stop presenting and go to my Matillion UI. So this is the Matillion UI. I'm already logged in here. The first time when you're ready to get set with Matillion, the way you launch Matillion in Cloud Native is you look for the product on the specific marketplace you're looking at. But for the demo, I'm going to use Matillion ETL for Snowflake on the AWS platform. Hence, I'm on the AWS marketplace. You can click on continue to subscribe. It walks you through some steps to select your region, your instance sizing, your security groups, and creating that security control around the instance. And once you walk through that process, within 15 to 20 minutes, you should have an AMI that gets caught on EC2 instance that lives inside your VPC. So Matillion as a company does not have access to that data, does not have access to that instance either. It's completely under your control. Once that instance is up and running, you either take the IP address or the DNS for that instance and use a browser to point to it. Again, no client-side tools to install, completely browser-based access. The first time you log into the UI, you have to create a project group and a project. I have created my project already. And for each project, you create an environment. An environment in Matillion is that named saved connection to your Snowflake instance in this case. This is where you define what account on the Snowflake side you're connecting to, credentials you want to use to connect to it, as well as the defaults for the role, warehouse, base, and schema. These are just the defaults so that Matillion knows what to use if nothing else has been specified with each component. There is ways to change these or use different ones, and you'll see that as part of the demo in those specific components. All right, so once that is set up, let's look at the UI itself. The UI, it's pretty self-explanatory. The main section is the canvas. This is where you drag and drop different components. The components menu shows up towards the bottom left. This is where you see all the components and get a list of them. You can always type into the search option, search bar on the components menu to look for a specific component. Top left is where you see all the jobs and the folders that you create. The tasks tab at the bottom, right, is where you see feedback from the UI for actions you're performing as you develop within the tool. And last but not least, there is the properties menu, which it's not populated right now, but as I walk through this demo, you'll see we use that. Matillion being an ELT tool, there's two main types of jobs in Matillion. First is an orchestration job, which is up on the screen right now. The main function of orchestrations is to, there's actually two functions of orchestration. One is to control the process flow, manage your dependencies, and the second is to connect to the source, extract data, and load it into your cloud data warehouse. Once you have loaded that data, there is the second type of job, which I'm doing a nested call here too, which is a transformation job. And I can double click on it to go to that job. And a transformation job is when you have that raw data in Slate, you select that raw data, apply your transformation, apply your business rules, and create your persistent structures. I like to start on the transformations just because there's a lot of pipelining tools out there that do the extract and load decently well, but Matillion does the extract and load and also has robust transformation capabilities. So I like to start on the transformation as part of this demo. One quick note for this job, I'm assuming I've done my extract from the source and loaded that data into my Snowflake instance. It's raw data, but it's in Snow. All right, so let's look at this transformation job. So first up, as soon as I click on any component, you see that the properties menu gets populated. Now, my end goal with this transformation is to select some flights and planes data from my raw data schema on my Snowflake, apply some business rules, and create some aggregates for that data. So first up, I need to select that data. So I'm using a table input component. I'm pointing it to my database and schema using the environment default. I showed you earlier where you set that default in the environment, which is right here, and that's what it's using. You can always use the ellipsis next to that property and select a different database from this dropdown. You can also use variables to parameterize these properties. One thing to note right here, I just want to mention, is any properties you're seeing on the screen can be parameterized. So it gives you a very flexible way to use the different variables available in Matillion to parameterize these properties so that you can make code reusable. All right, so next up for schema, I'm also pointing to the environment default, but I can change that as well. And since I'm expecting an existing table to select from, I get this dropdown to select my source table. Once I do that, I get the column list to select specific columns. I have to pick all, but you can pick and choose columns in this case. Since we are using pushdown SQL, each component is going to build a part of the SQL that, and we are going to build and add pieces to it as we walk through this job. With the first component, we just did a select from the table. So I can see that my SQL tab shows me the select statement that got created. Let's look at the sample tab real quick, because I think this is a really useful feature, which is pretty unique to Matillion, where you can actually look at the data as you're walking through this process. As you're developing, it gives you an insight into the data you're working with. So I just selected data from the flight table, so I just see that data as is. But as I walk through this process, any transformation or modification I'm doing to this data, I'll be able to see it at that step of the process. You can also get a row count to see how much data you're working with. So with this first component, I have about 56.4 million rows. Next component here is a filter component, which lets me add filter conditions to filter my data. I've added two different conditions: cancelled is equal to 0, and elapsed time, actual elapsed time is greater than 0. What that does to the SQL is it adds that where clause to the SQL from the prior component. And this is that reference to the prior component, which I can expand using this checkbox at the bottom. Once I do that, I can see the full SQL that has been generated so far up to this point. Let's quickly validate the row count because I didn't change any data, but I did apply a filter. So let's look at that row count real quick. If you notice, my row count did go down from 56 odd million to about 55.3 million. So that's that quick validation that I can do as I develop, hence helping me walk through that process quicker, not have to wait to complete building the job and then try to run it, debug it, etc. It just, I can do it right then and there. Next, I want to join my main streams of data, which is the flight data, to some planes reference data. To do that, I'm going to use a different component here. Instead of the table input, I just have a SQL component. In a transformation job, the SQL component lets you write a select statement. I just have a select distinct star from raw planes. But what this enables you to do is if you have a control table that holds your SQL, which you want to pass to it as a variable, you have the option to do that to help you parameterize it, reuse this piece of code. Or it could be a use case of when you want to pass a where clause based on a variable, you can do that as well. All right, so let's look at that sample real quick for the planes data. It is just information about the planes based on the table. And the SQL generated is what I had typed in that SQL property. Now that I have the two streams of data, I can join them. Let's look at that join component. With the join component, I'm selecting the main table as filter remove cancel, which is the prior component on the main stream, giving it an alias of F. In the joins, I select planes as my join table, give it an alias of P, and then select the type of join I want to perform. You get a drop down to select that. In the join expressions, this is where I define how the two tables get joined on some what expression. I've just defined a simple expression here, but on this window, under the functions menu, you see the different categories of functions available to use. These are native to the cloud data warehouse you're connecting to, in this case, Snowflake. Because we're using pushdown SQL, we want to make sure that you are able to leverage any functionality that Snowflake provides. Hence, the list of functions that you get is native to Snowflake. If you click on a function, you get a syntax of how to use that function. As you may have seen so far, the tool is pretty intuitive. So we have a lot of times customers where people self-serve. So the BI team self-serves from reporting perspective. So they may not be completely proficient in SQL. So this gives them a good reference to use a certain function. They also have a link to the full documentation on the Snowflake side to look at examples of how to use that function. Again, providing that easy access to reference material. If there is user-defined functions, you will see them in that category as well. All right. So once I configure that, now I can select my output columns and define which output columns I want in my output from this component. Let's look at the SQL because this should add a left outer join to the SQL and give it those aliases that I defined, and then joins based on tail number. And the sample tab, again, quick validation of the join if it worked correctly or not. So I did a left join, so I do see there is some nulls, but I do see that my columns do show up as part of that join process. I can quickly also do a row count validation in the join just to make sure I don't have any Cartesian joins. So this is the same count with we saw after the first component. So it gives me that validation. There is no Cartesians. I don't have to change anything with the join. The next component is a calculator component. In a calculator component, you can create expressions to define new calculator columns. My end goal with this job is to create aggregates and get the average of the delays. And I notice in my fields that my arrival and departure delays are varchars. So I'm going to use the Colley function to handle my nulls and empties and convert them to a 0, and also convert the data type to a number. I'm doing that same thing for the arrival delay as well. This window looks pretty similar to that join expressions window, where you have those different categories of functions to use to build more complex expressions. Now that I create 2 columns, I want to sample that data so that I can validate if those calculations happened correctly. This also gives you a chance to actually do the calculation to make sure your formulas in the calculator were correct. So this gives me that 2 new columns at the end for the arrival and departure delays. Next up, I have an aggregate component. An aggregate component, I can select the groupings property, and I have selected year and month in that grouping property. In the aggregations, I am going to do a count of year and then the averages of the delays. You can choose any other aggregate type as well, whichever. All of these are the ones supported by Snowflake. This should completely change the structure of the data. So I'm going to, let's look at the sample. Now it aggregate that data, so it gives me year, month, count year, and the 2 averages. The last component is one of the right components in the Snowflake product. In this case, it's the table output component, which lets me truncate and load or blindly append to an existing table. I'm pointing it to the default warehouse database and schema on the Snowflake side. And for the target table, since it's expecting an existing table, it's going to give you a drop down to select that table name from. Once I do that, I can, in the column mappings, I can select what columns from the stream connects to or loads into what column in that table itself. The final SQL that you see on the SQL tab right here is the SQL that is going to get pushed down to Snowflake when this job executes. And if you notice, this is the SQL that we built throughout these different components, and this is that one final SQL that it created to run this transformation. All right. So just from a write component perspective, there is other options for writing data back to Snowflake. One of them is table update. With the table update component, you can create a merge statement. So based on the key, you can update or insert. And then there's rewrite table, which lets you drop and recreate an existing table every time job runs. And then there's create view, which, as the name suggests, just creates a view based on the SQL that's generated by the code. All right, that's it for transformations. Let's look at orchestrations. So orchestrations is where I loaded my that raw data for the flights and plane into Snowflake. This is where I will connect to my source systems, get that data into Snowflake before I run that transformation. So let's take a look at that. Snowflake has separate compute and storage. And compute on Snowflake is called a warehouse. And being as elastic as it is, Snowflake has a command called warehouse, which lets you change the attributes for that warehouse. In Matillion, you have the option to leverage that command by using the alter warehouse component. And this helps because you don't have, when you're running a Matillion load or a transformation, you don't have to explicitly go to Snowflake to change the warehouse. You can do it right here through Matillion. So I'm using the alter warehouse component because I know I have a load coming up, I have a transformation coming up. So I'm going to up the size of my warehouse to a large. I also have options to change any of the other properties for that warehouse as well. Once I do that, I'm going to use 2 create table components. These help me create my tables on Snowflake. So in this case, I'm going to use 2 of them to create my flights table and my planes table. With the create table, you have the option to create or replace, which is that replace option, create just blindly, or create if not exist. I'm pointing it to the database and schema which is defined in my assignment defaults. And as an example here, for the table name, I'm using a variable. This is how you would reference a variable in any of the properties, where there's not a checkbox to say use variable. You just define it by typing in the variable name with after a dollar sign within curly brackets. And if I go to my job variables, this is where I have that parameter defined, and I have a default value for it. So I'm creating that raw flights table. If I go back to that component, in the table type, you can select whether to create a permanent table, a temporary table, or a transient table. In the columns property, this is where you define the column list that you want to create the table with. You can use the plus sign and type in that column information by using this wizard, or you can also use text mode, which is just a tab delimited list of the column information. Next up, if you have any primary keys or clustering keys that you define for that table, you can do that here as well. What it's doing in the background is it's based on the properties, it's creating create or replace. I had selected the replace option, hence it did the create or replace, but it's creating SQL that gets executed on Snowflake. I'm doing that same thing with the second create table, the only difference being it's a different table and a different column list, this one being specific to the plain state. My data for flights is in file formats that live in an S3 bucket. I'm going to use the S3 load component to leverage or connect to that S3 bucket, read those files, and load them into Snowflake. So with this component, I have the, I'm pointing it to the S3 object I'm connecting to, which is my S3 bucket. And then in the pattern, I'm going to give it the search criteria. So I'm looking at the path of flights and then looking for files, start with the name 20. My flights data is in formats of 2000.csv, 2001.csv, etc. So this would search for all the files that match that pattern and load that into Snowflake. Next, I'm defining what warehouse database scheme I'm connecting to on the Snowflake side, and then defining the table name that I want to populate with this data. The different file types supported with this component are CSV, Arrow, JSON, all the ones you on the screen. So most of the commonly used file types are supported by this component. The rest of the properties around delimiters, formats, what compression to use, etc. So once you define all of these properties, in the background, it's creating a copy into command. Copy into is considered the most efficient way to bulk load data into Snowflake, and we leverage that component by creating a command. So when you execute this component, it runs that copy into on Snowflake to leverage that best practice. My plains data is on an RDS database of type MySQL. This component is specific to RDS, but we do also have a database query component, which I'll just bring on the screen for a little bit. And the database query supports connecting to any database that has a JDBC type port. If you do not have the product does come pre-installed with a few of the drivers for the commonly used databases. If you do not have that driver, you can easily upload that driver by going to manage databases in the admin menu. Both of these components, the RDS query versus the database query, they work in a very similar fashion. Let's walk through the RDS query real quick. With the RDS query component, you'll select the database type and then point it to the RDS endpoint. With the database query, you would select the driver to use and then provide the URL based on how the driver is expecting it. You select the database name and then pass the credentials. With either of these components, you have the option to use basic mode, which would just read the system tables or the information schema tables on the source side and give you a list of tables to select from. With advanced mode, you can actually type in a select statement or SQL that you want to execute to source that data. This is again similar to that SQL component in a transformation job. This again is helpful if you want to pass certain parameters to select or certain parameter to add a fair cost to the select where you want to restrict how much data you're pulling in from the. Next, in the JDBC options, you can pass any driver-specific parameters that you want to have while selecting data and connecting to your host database. The warehouse database schema, this is the target that you want to load that data into. So with that, I'm still pointing to the environment defaults, selecting raw plain as the table to load. And then it's asking me for a staging property. With the Snowflake product, you have the option to use a Snowflake managed staging or to use an existing Amazon S3 that you may have in your account. Why does it do that? So just to understand the architecture of the component, when you run this component, it is connecting to your source system, in this case, the source RDS MySQL database, extracting that data or selecting that data, streaming it to create files in that staging location, whether it's Snowflake managed or a S3 bucket, and then leveraging that best practice of using the copy into to use those files to load that data into Snowflake. All right. So once that data is in Snowflake, then you use that transformation transformer. From connectors to different applications, we do have about 85 plus connectors specifically built for a few of the common applications out there. For example, we have Bings connectors, we have a box connector, we have few for Dynamics, we have some Google specific connectors. There is Marketo, NetSuite, etc. as you can see in this. And this list is easily available on Matillion.com. If you select the product, you should be able to get a complete list of these native connectors. What the native connectors do is they are still connecting using that API layer that the applications provide. Because the native connector built out, it parses the API response into a tabular format, making it easier for you to load it into Snowflake. Let's look at the Salesforce query component as an example. With the Salesforce query component and few of the other applications, the authentication is dependent on what the application supports. So with Salesforce, you have OAuth and username password as the available options. There is a one-time setup to let the application know that Matillion is connected to it. So that's the setup of OAuth with a combination of Matillion and the application. But once you have that, you select that authentication and connect to it. You can pass connection options based on what is supported for that application. And what you get is in the data sources, you get a list of sources to select from. These would have been the different endpoints on the if you were using the API there. But since you get a list, it's much easier to just select one. So in this case, I'm just going to use domain. And once you select that data source, what would have been elements of a JSON response, they show up as columns. So I can pick and choose those columns or just select all of them like I've done here. So the native connector helps parse that application API response and convert it into that tabular format. I'm pointing it to the warehouse database schema on Snowflake using my environment defaults. And in the target table, I'm going to define what table I want to load with this component. This component does also leverage that staging area. So I can select existing S3, or I can select Snowflake managed in this case as well. So the architecture remains the same. It extracts that data from Salesforce, streams it to create files on S3, and then uses copy into to load it into Snowflake. There is load options that you modify to manage how you manage the load and how that works. Is the first option here is clean stage files, which means the files that get created on that S3 as that temporary staging do get cleaned up by default because this property is set to 1. For certain use cases where you want to start building a data lake in your file storage, you can set this to off and use the appropriate relevant file prefix and start building that data lake as you load data into Snowflake. There's also options to control how you want the target table to be, whether you want the target table to be recreated every time this runs. So it gives you options how you manage that raw staging area on Snowflake, as well as your file storage. All right, so now that I've done the extract and load from all my source systems, next I'm just using one of the flow components, which is called an AND component, which tells the job to wait for the 3 different components to finish before it calls the nested transformation walkthrough. And once I run the transformation at the end, I can change my use the alter warehouse component to change my warehouse size back to a small. Because we are in the AWS platform, I'm going to open one more job. If you had, you may have already noticed, but any of these orchestration components, when I click on that, it shows these 3 cells. So you have options to connect the next component based on a success, a failure, or an unconditional completion. This job just gives an example of how error handling works in the team. So based on certain components and failures you want to handle, you can connect the next component or have a process, whether it's a different orchestration or a different component or just a component specifically for one of those AWS services. That is how you would create your error handling and logging as well. So with this example, on the success of that one demo EL, which is the nested orchestration I'm calling, I'm using a CloudWatch publish component to publish to a CloudWatch service. I can also use SNS on a failure to send a message, or I can post to an SQSQ. One thing to note here is with orchestrations, you can also have nested orchestration runs or transformation runs. So that gives you the ability to categorize or segregate your loads into different orchestrations, and then based on how you want to call them through a parent orchestration that calls your different child processes. Let's talk about scheduling. There is an inbuilt scheduler within Matillion under the project menu. If you go to manage schedules, you have an inbuilt scheduler, which is a cron-like scheduler. So if I click on the plus sign, I can name the schedule. I can enable or disable it using this checkbox. At the top, you can define when a certain thing needs to run based on the time zone that you select. At the bottom, you can define what version and what job needs to run using which environment. It makes it easy to schedule Matillion workflows right here from within the tool. While we are talking about triggering Matillion jobs, a different way of triggering a Matillion job is by listening on an SQSQ. So Matillion does have a component to post to an SQS. It can also listen on an SQSQ to trigger a Matillion job. Matillion does also have an API layer, which has a whole variety of endpoints, a whole range of endpoints. Some of them for exporting jobs, importing jobs, exporting schedules, updating environment variables. There is also endpoints where you can specify the project name and the job name, and you can trigger Matillion workflows using that API. That gives you the flexibility of having an orchestration. If you already have an orchestration or a scheduling tool, you can leverage that API to trigger Matillion jobs. On instance sizes large and above, Matillion does have some enterprise features. These are features, as I said, that are available on any of the platforms, but on instance sizes large and above. The first one is under the project menu, you do have Git integration from the tool. This lets you initiate your local repository, and then it asks you to connect to your remote repository. This gives you a way to have that code repo on a remote repository. Once you set this up, you have the option to push code, fetch code, create branches, merge branches, all that Git specific steps and functions right through the tool, right through Matillion, through this UI. One of the other enterprise features is granular permissions. What that lets you do is there is certain groups built in to the product that come in pre-installed with the product, but you can create custom groups. And within each group, you have the ability to change at a very granular level the who or the users of the group, what can they do or cannot do within the product. So for example, we spoke about OAuth for some of the native connectors. You can choose only a certain group that has access granted to create OAuth or delete OAuth. Gives you much more control, plus segregation of which users can do what within the tool. One of the other enterprise features is concurrent connections. So if I go to my environment and go to that last section where I selected my defaults, you see this property for concurrent connections. I am on a large instance, so my concurrent connection can go up to a maximum of 4. And what that lets me do, as the tooltip suggests, is it is the number of connections or sessions that one single job can use to connect to Snowflake, and the number of threads available per job. How that helps is, let's say I go back to my orchestration job. If you notice, I have those 3 parallel streams. All of these are connecting to Snowflake, so that lets me have 3 different jobs using 3 different sessions to connect to Snowflake, hence increasing the concurrency or the parallelism that is used during running a job. One other enterprise feature is auto documentation. And this is really helpful, because if you right click on a job, I'm going to use the transformation as an example. I can click on generate job documentation. And what that does is creates an HTML file. And if I open it, it has the documenting, and it starts at the top level. So it gives you a screenshot of the flow of the process, and then digs into each and every component and how the properties are set up for that component. Gives you a quick 1-second right-click way of getting documentation out while passing on jobs from team to team, or just from a knowledge transfer perspective. All right, that's all I have for the demo.
Neville, thanks very much. That was great. Appreciate the depth that you went into. One of the interesting things that I think is noteworthy about Matillion is this idea that you're actually crowdsourcing development or feature development through Matillion community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we have a user community where you can, we have a couple of things. We have a user community where people share their ideas. People go through, it's almost like a forum-like setup where you can post questions. Some other user might have an answer for that. They can come answer those questions. We also do have an ideas portal. And that's where customers can actually connect and submit their ideas for enhancements. And our product team closely monitors that queue or that portal, just to get ideas based on customer feedback of what can be improved within the product.
Well, and just in the recent release of 1.5, there were a couple of features that came directly from the community. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. I don't know the exact features, but there were a couple of features that got added based on the community. And that's true for every release, to be honest. It is one of the major things that the product team looks at for getting ideas in and using them in the development and the releases.
Well, another interesting thing is effectively you're fairly transparent with pricing. You've got pricing on the website, and people can certainly go to matillion.com and check out the pricing. But over and above that, where are you finding traction with Matillion, given the kind of specific places that you're that you're attempting to integrate?
So first, I'll answer the first piece of the question. So from a pricing perspective, right, that's just the cloud native nature of Matillion. It's a pay-as-you-go model. You spin up an instance for if you pay only for when the instance is on, and hence gives you a much more cost-effective way of having a tool which does end-to-end. So right from extracting data to loading it to transforming it, you have an enterprise solution, but you're also using that as-you-go model. Just from that pricing perspective, based on your usage, there is other options for signing up for an enterprise level contract as well, which you can consider or customers can consider once they progress with Matillion, mature with Matillion, and need more instances as they proceed in their journey. And the second piece of the question, from an adoption perspective, just given the nature and the ease and the scope or the functionality that Matillion covers, we have customers from so many very different small, large customers, enterprise level customers. We have small companies, startups that use Matillion. Plus, from a perspective of usage, because we have those 85 plus connectors, there is a variety of use cases that we can solve by using when customers use Matillion. And that's where we mainly see the adoption from, along with that cloud native modern architecture.
So one of the questions we've got is what if I don't need data transformation yet?
That's actually a great question. So we do have a product called Matillion Data Loader that is available for customers to use. And it's a free product that gets you going on your cloud data journey. And that's a good way of testing, of sourcing data, getting into a cloud data warehouse, trying it out before you need that transformation. And once you're at a point where you know that you can load data, it's the cloud data warehouse is the direction you want to go, that's when you can then consider Matillion ETL for your end-to-end processing.
So that's interesting. So are you finding that to be the typical path that people are taking? Is that kind of free trial to then an engagement?
Not always. It is a good way for companies that are not cloud familiar yet to adopt and try out the cloud before they invest in a tool which is an end-to-end tool. So that just gets, that's almost like a gateway into the cloud and to get a sense and of the cloud. We have a whole list of customers that directly adopt Matillion ETL, and that's just because the way it's deployed, the security aspect of it, that it's within your control, and the end-to-end functionality.
Another question that's come in, can you script in Matillion?
You can. Matillion does actually have script components. In the orchestrations I showed, there is actually a SQL script component, which lets you write SQL that runs on Snowflake. So you can do your DDLs through that component. You can have execute stored procs on Snowflake using that component. There is also a script component for Python and Bash. So if you have a specific use case where you want to do some Python coding to maybe split a file before you load it, or certain use cases that Python might do easier, you have that option as well.
So just curious, as we're wrapping things up, what are you looking forward to in the new year as we head through this particular transformation?
So we keep enhancing the tool as we go, right? And some of the enhancements I'm looking at in the roadmap, the adoptions, the new products we released. So we recently released Matillion ETL for Databricks Delta Lake. Earlier in the year, we released the product for Azure Synapse, and we are seeing more adoption of those products as we go on, as we had in Q3, Q4. So going forward, those two new products along with the existing products, it's going to be a great journey. It's going to be awesome to be a part of the journey.
Well, Naval, thank you very much for your time today. We certainly would encourage everybody to check out Matillion, go on their website. Again, there's lots of interesting information there, including pricing. And as you're heading down your cloud journey, I think Matillion is certainly a solution that you should consider to be a part of that. So thanks very much, Naval. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome. Glad to be here.
Sure. With regard to where we're headed with Data Demo Day, next year we're going to be doing a whole series of Data Demo Days. This has been a very interesting offering for us, providing all kinds of interesting insights. We hope you got something out of the 3 hours of these tours down these technologies, certainly very interesting. And we would also encourage you to go to solutionsreview.com and check out all of the information that we have on our analytics and BI sites, certainly covering a lot of this in a variety of formats, including certainly posts, but videos as well. And we want to thank you very much for all of your time today. It was certainly a pleasure of ours to put this together, and we'll look forward to doing another one very soon. Thanks very much.